Yo's, welcome to my complete and absolute Genji guide. This guide is for all of the players that want to be like Hacksaw, Sparkle, Shadow 2K, Necros, Shadowburn, EQO, Architect, my personal favorite, Prophet. I mean, honestly, you name it, this guide has got something for everyone to learn, unless you're a complete Genji god. In that case, you know more than me. Although, before this video begins, 99.2% of my entire viewer base are not subscribed to the channel. So go on down to that subscribe button and blade the fuck out of it. Let's try to get to 500 subscribers by the end of the year. So these are the 5 sections of the video. First is playstyle, second is mechanics, third is positioning, fourth is Dragonblade, and finally any tips and tricks that you want to know, like animation cancels that might help you out in some of your ranked games. All timestamps will be in the description below and in the pinned comment, so if you want to jump to any particular part of the video, you can just press the timestamp and it will send you straight to it. Due to Genji's super high damage output and very good mobility, there are a plethora of playstyles that you can play on him. He is a hybrid hero in the sense, and it's up to you to pick what playstyle suits you the best and work around it. There are 3 main playstyles that Genji utilizes. The Brawling Genji, where you act as a frontlining DPS, capitalizing off of any plays that your tank makes. This means going in on the enemy backline off of a Winston jump or a Diva boost, and just generally trying to get dash resets and deal as much damage as possible. Your job is to be a hard engage. The second playstyle, the more flanking Genji, is where you look to disrupt the enemy backline and take attention from them off of healing and off of your team and onto you, creating opportunities for your other DPS and your tank to strike and to create pressure so that you can thrive. Your job isn't necessarily to get kills, but instead to be as annoying as possible and slow the enemy team's tempo so that you can get value. The third playstyle is the Poking Genji, where you act as a ranged DPS trying to farm primarily for your ultimate. This is used by players who want to end fights by using ultimate combos like Nanoblade and Foxblade. You might struggle with this playstyle, you'll find that you aren't really doing anything in between just poking from afar. You need to pick one of these playstyles and use that as your base. You need to have an understanding of the other 2 playstyles so that you can incorporate them into your game plan. The reason for this is because Genji plays the best when you understand all 3 of these major playstyles and utilize all of them to get the most value. If you're always frontlining, you become very predictable, and so the enemy team could play further back to punish you for it. If you're always farming for your blade, then you might not be able to take advantage of the aggressive dash resets or the more snowbally playstyle of the Brawling Genji. And if you're always flanking, you might not be there to help your team or kill for your supports or kill overextending enemy DPS when your team needs them to. And so you need to be able to switch between all of these playstyles, and that's what makes a good Genji player. It's hard to understand at first how you mesh all of them together, but just pick one of them and work around it, and eventually you'll understand how this works. So in simple terms, Genji thrives off of getting close to his enemies and dealing loads and loads of damage using the bursts from his shurikens, his melee, his dash, his deflect. How you get to that position and what specific combos and abilities you use to deal that damage and when you deal that damage is up to you. It just matters that you're being a nuisance and have some kind of pressure and impact on the game. If you're struggling with mechanics, I'm sorry to say, but you're only really going to get better at Genji's mechanics by playing Genji. Hard reality of it, but I can give you some tips. Make sure your sensitivity is right for you. You can 180, but it's not too fast that you can't aim, and it's not too slow that you can't do anything at all. Bind your melee to a button that's actually usable. You're going to need to use your melee a lot on Genji, because you might find that there'll be downtime where you have to reload and you have no ammo, or you might need to melee after a dash. Don't worry about any of the numbers of Genji's damage, any of those statistics. It doesn't matter. The 2 numbers you need to remember are that Genji's blade does 110 damage per slice and his dash does 50 damage. That's it. Don't worry about anything else. There are only 2 combos that you need to know. That's the left click shuriken dash. This is good for killing opponents that are standing still, mostly snipers. You throw 3 shurikens and dash just before they land, and it should insta-kill them and give you your dash back. And the second is the dash right-click melee. This is usually labeled the insta-kill combo, but it doesn't actually insta-kill unless you land all 3 shurikens as headshots, so instead it's good for finishing off targets if they're just above half HP. Now this is probably the best advice that I'm going to give you in the entire guide. Don't focus on your mechanics. What I mean by that is your mechanics in the sense of your left click and your right click. The reason for this is most of the game you're going to be spending left clicking from afar or right clicking up close to deal as much damage and as much burst damage as possible. Yes, weaving in your cooldowns and your melee and hitting headshots is obviously very useful and will secure a kill and can be the difference between you getting a kill and you getting away with nothing. What's more important than those primary mechanics is actually your movement. And in fact, movement probably matters more than anything else on this guide. And that's because movement is your lifeline. Movement is what will stop you from dying, and having your movement abilities up to escape is what could change a 1v1 from a loss into a win. A lot of what separates the great Genji players is actually their movement. And when using it correctly, you can quite literally tear Pharahs out of the sky. So how do you improve your movement? Focus on using your wall climb more, and focus on using your movement with intention. Don't just double jump mindlessly like an idiot. I know a lot of you are guilty of this because a lot of Genjis will just spam their double jump like they have a script open. This does you no good. The karma easier to hit and you have a pattern. That's the last thing you want on Genji. You want to be unpredictable. You need to be unpredictable. Don't be scared to walk along the ground. Don't be scared to use your crouch to stop your sound and to sneak up behind the enemy team, because a lot of the times you will go unnoticed, especially in lower ranks. Double jumping almost brings attention to you, and you want to use it when you need to actually dodge something and when you need to get up high. For instance, when you need to jump up to get a shot off. Really want to get good at your mechanics and good at your movement. I can't really give you all of the in-depth tips. If you want those, go to the end of the video, and at the end of the tips and tricks section, all of the cool stuff you can do with your wall climb, your double jump, etc. All of the stuff you should be doing. But what matters more is that you put in the time and the effort to actually focus on improving this in your games, and trust me, you're going to see a big difference when you start using your wall climb more. So for most of you, this is going to be the most impactful section of this guide. This is going to tell you what you need to be doing, where you need to be, and why you're going to be there. I'm going to give you an example from a Hollywood game, and off of that, you should be able to know enough about positioning to make your own decisions in your ranked games. So I've conjured up this kind of image on an online editing software. Apologies if it's messy, but I'm going to explain very, very quickly where I'm going to position myself, why I'm going to position myself there, and how this is actually useful and is going to help you win games. So this is primarily from the perspective of me using the passive Genji playstyle, and then switching to brawling Genji when my diva dives. You may choose to flank, and then go back and play passive. It's completely up to you, but hopefully this section gives you a better understanding and a better idea of why you're positioning yourself the way you're positioning yourself. There are a couple of things to note. I don't need to be forcing plays as Genji. What I mean by that is I don't need to be dashing into the enemy team and trying to kill all of them constantly. I don't need to be using the brawling Genji playstyle all of the time. And sometimes, especially on defense, because we have the advantage, I can be using the more passive Genji playstyle to poke at them and to throw shurikens from afar to get them low before I dive them. This is what I mean by meshing the playstyles together. I'll show you how the flanking playstyle can be used when I start talking about the enemy team's attack. The red team right now is defending, and this neutral team is attacking. So this Genji is chosen to play on the high ground. Now, high ground is very, very strong for Genji, mainly because he can get up on there and he can get off of there very fast. This is because of his wall climb, his dash, and his double jumps, which means he can easily get on and off high ground. And alongside playing with a diva, which can also get on high ground, this is super strong because the diva can always dive the enemy Genji if they try to go there to protect them. Now, this might not happen in your ranked games because teams are uncoordinated, and oftentimes what happens in Overwatch 2 is that the enemy tanks will be focused solely on each other and trying to match each other. What this leads to is situations where you might be tempted to shoot the enemy tank purely because they're, quotation marks, overstepping. They're not really overstepping, they have the healing of both of their teammates, and they're probably not going to die, especially Zarya with 2 bubbles. Instead, Diva's going to stay there and match her, as she can't really step up without dying, and she needs to protect her team. This Genji is going to play high ground and poke. Now, controlling this space is very important. It prevents players from getting on the flank, as you can see down into this area and up front here, and also the staircase, and also gives them entryway into dives if the diva sees a low HP target. So for instance, the Zarya gets forced back and the diva knows that the Ana's low HP. She can dive her, and the Genji can match that dive off of his tank's playstyle in the more brawling Genji type of style and kill that Ana. You do not have to be forcing plays. Instead, what you should be doing is trying to take space that your tanks aren't taking. On Genji and Tracer, this is really important because you have the mobility to get around it, and you need to be looking very closely for any key cooldowns that will allow you to dive isolated targets. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that this team is pushing up over here into this choke, and the Ana is alone. You know that the Ana's use Sleep Dart because players in low ranks just kind of throw cooldowns out there. Even if she hasn't, you have your double jump and your dash, And the enemy team might still be focused on the D.Va that they see as free ult charge, and not a problem because they're now going around this choke. As a Genji, you can now dash to engage onto this Ana. Your D.Va might see this and walk forward to protect you, or she might not and stay shooting. In that case, this kind of creates a crossfire. The enemy team have to do one of two things. Either they go to focus their D.Va, who's going to stay alive, or they go to focus you and change direction. You might get this kill as this Genji and be able to back out, or you might not. Either way, as long as you survive, it's good, because you pull the attention of the enemy team, and they're then forced to go back, and they reset to a neutral position. They almost give up all of this space. You didn't have to get a kill there, but yet somehow you've still kind of won your team the fight. As a defender, you have an inherent advantage because the attackers have to brute force their way through you. Let's now look at this from an attacker perspective. I'm playing up close in this kind of brawling Genji playstyle with my Zarya, with my tank, playing to poke, and I see that the Genji's up on high ground, and a lot of Genjis might be tempted to try and take this space and to walk up and to fight the Genji. Now, this could be good if you have the help of your support. If you have a Zenyatta, Discord Orb, or a Bubble, you can go to this Genji and force him off high ground, and you now control high ground, and your team can rotate to it. But if you're not coordinated, you can flank around the enemy team and distract them, throwing your shurikens or whittling down the enemy Zen, so that your team is then forced to focus helping the Zen. The D.Va might turn around, and this gives your team more space. You can see how you haven't got a kill here, but you have inadvertently helped your team move up. This is why it's not fair to say as a DPS player that you can't control the game or you can't help your team, especially as a Genji with all of his movement, because unless you're literally getting drilled down and they're holding every single choke perfectly, there is something you can do in every situation. There's a piece of space that you can take. Even in this position right now, the attacking Genji isn't contesting the defending Genji. He now has free shots onto the Ana in the backline, and he can very easily dash to her, kill her with a right-click melee, and dash out here to create even more pressure, dash back to his team. This is kind of the basics of positioning in Overwatch 2. This is kind of a bit different than Overwatch 1. The defending Genji even has different positions you can take, where you can play here, or you can play in this room looking to flank the supports. Honestly, you can do a lot of stuff. But the key idea as the Genji is to control the space that your tank isn't controlling in the safest way as possible. For instance, if this defending Genji is walking all the way out here, then the Ashe has a better shot on him, and he is less likely to get support because he's further away, which means he might actually get picked off. Whereas if he's playing here, he's a lot more safe because he can always get down and play behind cover. Now, if you managed to watch through all of this section and haven't skipped, one, I commend you for your effort to learning, and two, I'd just like to note something very important. Genji excels at isolating targets from their team, which means you shouldn't be afraid to go in and take those risks if you really deem it necessary. Like if your team's in a scenario where they're one down, by isolating the supports and force them to take 1v1s with you, because that's what Genji excels at. He's a duelist, and so you should really be abusing that 1v1 potential. Sorry if that didn't come through clear enough. So hopefully off of this, you're able to pick your position better. But even with this in mind, it's very important to note, don't flank on bad timings, don't engage on bad timings. Try and play when your team is up, when your team is with you, and when they can capitalize off of it. Yes, Dragonblade. At the time of recording this section of the video, it is potentially the most impactful DPS ultimate in the game. If you got into this part of the guide, I'm assuming you already know how Genji works, so I'm not going to explain the basics of it, but I'm going to instead explain when you should blade, what blading does, and how to actually blade and get those fast Dragon Blades off like Necros. If you want to know all of the animation cancels for Blade, they will be at the very beginning of the tips and tricks section. Timestamp is in the description. As a Genji player, you should be able to recognize that Blade is best used to secure teamfight wins and capitalize off of used cooldowns, turning the teamfight in your favor. This does not mean to 1v5 Blade, but instead to pay close attention to the enemy backline and their ability usage or ultimate economy, and judge based off that. For instance, if an Ana wastes Sleep Dart or his Zen burns Transcendence out of nowhere, whether you should go in and Blade. Blade is also very good for starting teamfights, as due to Genji's increased movement speed during his ultimate and super high burst damage, it changes the focus of the enemy team and requires them to put resources into you or die, meaning your team can walk up and capitalize off of it. If you are playing really well, then spamming Blade off of cooldown might not be a bad idea, as it can stagger the enemy team and you can build it up back quite fast. You shouldn't really be using Blade to clean up teamfights, but instead to win them, as Genji's base kit is strong enough on its own that you do not need to use his ultimate to do so. Blade is primarily a tool for focusing and chopping down the enemy backline. Please do not use Genji's blade on a full HP tank, as it's a waste of an ultimate and just literally does nothing. You may also see players using Blade to bait out support ultimates, as quite often supports recognize Blade as a huge threat and save the defensive ults for it. This is a strength of Blade, as if you can time this correctly and your teammates have an ult that can guarantee a fight win instead. For instance, your Reaper has a Death Blossom, but Lucio on the enemy team has a Sound Barrier. Blading to get rid of the Sound Barrier can open up your Reaper to get kills and close out the fight. You trade your ult for theirs, and this necessarily isn't a bad blade, just a different usage of it. Opposite to this, you will see Nano Blade used quite frequently. Nano Blade allows Genjis to one-shot squishy opponents using slash and dash and gives them enhanced durability. An important thing to note about Nano Blade is that you can actually outdamage Transcendence with it, as long as you time slash and dash correctly. Overall, Genji's ultimate is a potent ability that should be used to zone out and kill enemy healers and DPS, utilizing his crazy mobility with dash and movement speed to create loads of space and secure teamfight wins. So how do you actually blade? If you want the Necros blade, stick around, but most Genji start their blade dry or with nano by dashing high into the air, blading to reset their dash cooldown, and then dashing onto an enemy or dropping down, double jumping and dashing on targets to finish them off quickly. What's important to note about Blade is that most of the time you become the only target to the enemy team. What I mean by this is that while Genji is blading, the only thing the enemy cares about is you. With that in mind, we have to be careful with our dash usage and remember that we are still able to deflect during our ultimate. This means that you can tank damage head on and actually use your deflect to force out enemy stun cooldowns like a Risa Javelin or Ana Sleep Dart before you dash into the enemy backline if you know that they have them up. More important than CC cooldowns is mobility. Abilities like Moira Fade and Kiriko's Swift Step can ruin a blade if they time them correctly, so it's up to you to save your dash so that you can chase them up after they use their mobility. You do not need to burn dash instantly, only when you know that you will kill them or when you know that they cannot get away. Don't be afraid to take Blade slow, as you have a full 6 seconds, and during Dry Blade, if you know that the player has their abilities off cooldown, you can slash, dash, and slash again to deal that 200 damage faster and secure the kill. So with all this in mind, you still want to blade faster. So how do you actually do a Necros blade? Necros learn how to blade as fast as it does through practice, and more practice, but I'll explain to you how you can get faster Dragon Blades. While dashing up into the air, use the time that you are up there to scout for the players that you want to kill and note their positions in your head. That way you can flick your dash to that position and kill them faster. Even if you do not know the exact whereabouts, the dash hitbox is quite big, and even if you don't dash directly through them, dashing close to them will still let you deal damage, and over time by doing this your dash muscle memory will improve immensely. If you aren't able to dash up into the air, or don't want to, remember that supports usually stick close to each other, and that means behind you. So 180ing could get you a free kill. With all this in mind, blading as fast as possible may not be the greatest idea, so take it slow to begin with and work your way up. So this section is kind of a bit mismatched because I threw everything that I could together, but I hope you watched all the way through, you learned something from it. In general, Genji has a lot of animation cancels, and they're not really necessary, but if you want to step your game up, hopefully some of the things you learn here will actually make you a better player. One thing I will say before I get to this section though, is every time you watch a Genji player's gameplay, even when you're watching mine, try and take notice of all of the small things that they do, because you'll probably pick up more things by watching other players play than just having it told to you. One thing that's super underrated on Genji, and something that I really don't see a lot of players doing or utilizing at all, is actually staying close to the ground as much as possible, especially in 1v1s, and spamming crouch and kind of using this AD movement and playing around cover. Playing around cover is really important because you can use it to wall climb off of, and you can climb up it to get to basically anywhere. It's like a free get out of free card if you don't have dash available. And you know, cover's just really important because you can dip in and out, you can shoot your shurikens. I just think it's something that's super underrated and something that Genji should utilize more. Alongside that, staying on the ground actually kind of makes you a harder target to hit if you have good movement, if you have good AD strafes. And what I mean by that is, if you watch Kabaji's video, you'll understand, but not just AD strafing like this, going back and forth, but like actually putting some thought into trying to mix up your movements, throwing some crouches in there. Crouches don't do too much on Genji, but they can throw off like a Widow or Sojourn's aim a little bit. And you can even throw some like backwards motions in there as well to throw them off. But honestly, Genji's hitbox is hard enough to hit as it is. And honestly, sometimes by double jumping, it makes you easy to hit, especially at longer ranges. A Genji that's double jumping, you'll notice this if you play against him, is way easy to hit because he just kind of drops down. So to counteract this, one thing you can do is kind of AD strafe in the air as you're jumping, which kind of counteracts this movement and throws them off. You can go like, you can jump and be like, oh, I'm going to go right, and then you go left at the last second, and it kind of throws off their aim. The attack can be cancelled by pressing E. It can also be cancelled by wall climbing. The start of Genji's Dragonblade can be cancelled by wall climbing. And during Dragonblade, you can dash after a slash to be able to deal more slashes. Now, I'm not sure whether this works only off of left slash to right slash, but either way, it's higher damage. And wall climb cancels the end of Genji's sheathing animation. A very important tip is every time you dash, or just before you dash, right click and then right click melee. Try and turn around, dash behind your opponent and turn around them. Genji can actually ledge climb forever, as you can see. You can just kind of cycle climbing up over and over again. Now, I don't know why this is the case. I don't know if this is ever going to be useful to you, but it's something you might want to know, because it's a cool tech. Ghostblade does exist, you've seen it at the start of this video, but I personally don't think it's very useful, and it's really hard to replicate in Overwatch 2. You can still kind of do that, which is similar. Genji can actually curve through any objects that he can shoot through. So his dash will curve around and send you exactly where you were aiming. And I recommend when you blade to never use your double jump until you actually need this. So if you're fighting a Pharah, you want to save your double jump for like the perfect moment. So you can jump, wall climb, you still have your jump, you can ledge climb again, ledge climb again. You can kind of just chain that combo together. You can animation cancel Genji's right click with melee. And you can actually make your hitbox smaller by aiming backwards towards an enemy. So if a Widow is right here, aiming myself with my back turned towards her, looking down, and doing the greetings emote. I have it bound to my mouse button form, and it actually makes you like basically unhittable. So that's pretty much it for Genji in general. I think there's nothing really else that I can teach you. Other than that, Genji's a character that you really just have to master and put all the hours in to learn. There's probably a lot more animation counters that we don't know about, but those are the ones that are really useful for now, will help you out. In terms of general tips for Genji, try and always use your dash to disengage. You don't always have to die with your team. I think this is the thing that I've learned the most playing Overwatch 2, is that you can minimize the amount of deaths you have and the impact you have, because characters like Genji and Tracer become more annoying the longer they're alive, because they become more of a threat. They haven't died, they haven't fed any ult charge. So don't be afraid to disengage if your entire team, you know, has just killed themselves, because you kind of just be wasting your time, and you can use your movement to get away really quickly. Well, thank you so much for watching this guide. If you can't tell, this took a long time to put together. Honestly, I don't quite know why. I've been working on it like non-stop for fucking, I don't know how long, but I had to keep going over and rescripting everything. But if you got to the end of the video, thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, follow me on socials, and I'll see you in the next one. Brofist!